Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton agenda Awani khas yang dirakamkan di sisi persidangan yang begitu penting, iaitu membincangkan tentang transformasi untuk kebebasan bagi negara kita dan masyarakat kita, tetapi dalam aspek perundangan dan bagaimana kita melihat kembali kepada perlembagaan dan juga pengurusan ataupun urus tadbir undang-undang. Oleh itu saya ingin meminta izin berbicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. I would like now to welcome Thomas Perez, the Assistant Attorney General of the United States. You head the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice.
Correct.
So I'm very glad that you are here, because for 3 straight days, for the first time in my career as a journalist, I'm at a public forum in Malaysia, directly and openly having discussions with people responsible for looking at the Constitution and the governance and implementation of law in that sense. And that's a big deal. But in the States, that might not be anything, because America had about 200 years of advantage in discussing the things that we've been discussing for only maybe 55 years in this country. So this discussion today is for me to get as much wisdom from the struggle that America has had, especially nowadays when the context of modern society sometimes look back and say that's no longer relevant for us, what happened 50 years, let alone something that happened 240 years ago. However, at this very same conference, it's been presented that without the historical and contextual reading of why the Constitution was framed in the way it was framed, we wouldn't be doing justice to the spirit of the Constitution and whatever reform we want to do for the modern society. If I can go to deep issues like the divide between race and religion, for example, how do you look at it from where you are sitting right now in the Department of Justice? Because yes, America is the land of the free. Yes, we know and aspire to have so many things that you have done in terms of giving and guaranteeing the liberty and civil rights of individual and community. But at the same time, that's where also we look at things that really hurt the feelings of even us, thousands of kilometers or miles away, like the burning of the Quran and the hate speeches. So if I can pick that up first, because this morning, the day that you are presenting at this conference was also the day that we start really discussing about freedom of expression. So freedom of expression means it's guaranteed that I can say and speak my mind. But in this country, maybe that's not the way to go, because as Professor Harding put it, it's a tinderbox that's waiting to be lighted when we refer to certain issues like religion and race. So how do you look at it? Because I'm sure even in the United States of America, some people were looking at it from the same light before, but maybe with hindsight now, you can say that you can get past that. So maybe that's one of the issues for us to consider in this country. Your expert opinion, please.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here, and this is a historic conference. I have learned so much in the 3 days I have been here. I had the privilege of listening to the Prime Minister. I've spent a lot of time with the Attorney General, and also spending time with non-governmental organizations. And it's so critically important when you're talking about issues of racial equality, religious freedom. It's so important to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table. And it was very inspiring this morning, for instance, to look out and see an audience of 500-600 people there, all very, very engaged. And so I am incredibly optimistic about the path forward. And we have so much in common in terms of sharing universal values of commitment to equality and opportunity and religious freedom. And as I said to the audience today, we have had a lot of experience in the United States, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way. We have a wonderful document, the Declaration of Independence, signed in 1776, in which we declared, our forefathers, that all men were created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights. And yet, at the same time, African Americans were held in bondage, and it took nearly 100 years and a civil war to address that issue.
Yes.
And even after the Civil War was fought, it took another 100 years to really give meaning to the notion of equality. And so we've had a long journey, and it's been an imperfect journey in the United States, but we have learned a lot, and we have seen in the context of speech and religious freedom our experience, and I've said many times that our experience we hope would be helpful, but we recognize that your context is different, and so we offer our experience so that you can reflect and figure out what works as this country goes through this remarkable process of transformation. And our experience has been, especially in the free speech context, that when you allow the marketplace of ideas to be out there, the good ideas prevail over time. It's messy sometimes. There are people in the United States who, for instance, get so angry at our country that they will go out and burn a flag. That's a horrible act, in my opinion. And there are many members of our Congress who have tried to amend our U.S. Constitution to make that illegal. And ultimately, Congress has decided, and I think they got it right, that it's not right to ban that action or put it in our Constitution, that we should again allow that marketplace of ideas to prevail, and that's worked well for us over time. I work in the Civil Rights Division, and the Civil Rights movement in the United States, it was a movement originally to help African Americans. That movement would not have succeeded but for the First Amendment. People like Martin Luther King and others took to the streets, they took to the pulpit, they took to the airwaves, and they said, we demand a more just society. And there were some people who didn't like that and actually wanted to pass laws that said that Dr. King and others were obstructing the peace by doing that. And fortunately, they weren't successful, and that free speech really helped to bring about a more just society.
Agreed, but I also always like to play the devil's advocate, and I've heard here not only the name of Dr. King, but also of Gandhi and many others. But many of these names, look at what happened to them. The forces that brought the very bad, tragic consequences to these great names, in most people's mind, sometimes in some places, are still there. So you cannot kill off the negative influences, for example. So that's why they're worried. If we create a level playing field for anyone to say anything that they want, and in a country that don't have the advantage of 100 years or 200 years, 55 years is rather short span of time for us to really reconcile everything. So I would like to take your wisdom, because you've been a prosecutor of hate crimes also for about 10 years, if I get you right in your speech. So when it goes to court, for example, you know, where do all these stand? Because sometimes at the end of the day, it's the mechanism that is more important. Maybe we're talking about the big macro picture, but when we go down and nail it down to specifics, maybe we can handle it better. Like, people don't want the mosque to be having an extension, but there are recourse, legal recourse, and even the government will go to court to fight for you to be able to expand your mosque, because you shouldn't be discriminated against just because of your religion, for example. There are civil linings there, so maybe we can discuss that specifically after the short break. Thank you for still watching Agenda Awani, and it's in English because I'm having a very, very learned and expert guest here, Tom Perez. He's from the Department of Justice. Whoa, big name, right? Yes, so always watch Agenda Awani. We're talking about civil rights, but I'm going now to specifics, because I think a lot of nations in Asia, if we look across and we ask academics, they would agree that a lot of these nations has sort of said that we put civil liberties at the back for a while, because we really have to run and catch up with the development of the world. And we will say things like, we can afford to have that, where we're not fighting to survive anymore. If we are fighting to be just above poverty line, how can we have the luxury of, really wasting time on debating civil rights? But the wisdom that has been learned from the United States of America is that one thing that I'll always remember what you said in your presentation, and you quoted the Imam of a mosque where he had problems in trying to expand the mosque. For every hit, letter, or whatever remarks that he's gotten, he will get 10 more. But therein, maybe the wisdom here is you have to go through pain to reap the full fruit of civil rights and the quest for civil rights.
The example you describe is a very vivid example, and let me give you a little context.
Okay.
This was a mosque in the state of Tennessee that was trying to expand and build a wonderful facility. And the majority of the community was very, very supportive. But there was a vocal minority that attempted to stop them. And for every person who was expressing opposition, there were people across the religious spectrum, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, everyone who came together to say, this is America. And so what we have seen in the free speech context is people who have that right to free speech, who say things that are offensive. What ends up happening is they, in turn, trigger a response from people of goodwill across the religious spectrum, across the racial spectrum, and that's very important. And what's also equally important, and I think you touched on it in this conversation, is that the right to free speech is not unlimited. When I was a hate crimes prosecutor, and now I supervise those prosecutions. And when people cross the line and threaten someone, we've done cases involving threats to kill people. We've done cases involving threats over the internet. An individual sent death threats to the heads of NGOs who were working to help immigrants in the United States, and he said, I'm going to kill you because I hate the fact that you're helping immigrants. That's a crime in the United States. And so while we cherish the right to free speech, it's not an unlimited right. And when you cross that line, we don't hesitate to take prompt action. It's a very fact-specific inquiry. And sometimes people say, well, it was free speech, but there's no such thing as the right to say, I'm going to kill you.
Yes. Because I had the opportunity to have this conversation also with Prof. Vladek, and he mentioned a case, even in his presentation, where there was this group, and they strongly believe in what they do. So what they did was they go to the funerals of American servicemen, and at the funeral they would, shout out their mission, and even to the extent they say this is God's punishment because of whatever that it is that we have done wrong in this country. So while we talk about universal right to have free speech and free expression, there's also the universal right to look at, in these parts of the world, respect of culture, respect of the privacy of the family, for example, in that case. And if I take funerals here, it's a very, very deep, emotional, personal moment for the members of that family. So, but from Professor Vladek's analysis also, he said that the state actually at that time could have governed that better, because you can control to the time, the manner of that expression and the place. Because it doesn't have to be allowed to happen at the same time where that happened. Or even if it's at the same time, the state can ask that you must be 50 feet away. So because you have been involved in hate crimes and all that, maybe sometimes it's the details that we must be debating about and not the broader picture.
Well, the details do matter, and there are ways to regulate these activities consistent with the Constitution. But at the same time, it's so important, I think, to point out that for every time someone like the situation you described does a despicable act, or Terry Jones does the unconscionable, there are literally hundreds of people out there, people of goodwill, who say, we deplore that. And it's not simply the Muslim community coming together. It is Sikhs, it's Christians, it's Jews, it's people of all faiths coming together. And that is how we have been so successful, I think, in the United States. There have been movements across our nation's history. In the 19th century, there was a very strong movement against Catholics in America. It was thought that Catholics were somehow going to be bring about horrible things in America, just as there is this movement of people of bad will who say some of the same things today about Muslims or Jews. And those movements have always died and fizzled out because people again came together and said, this is not America. Our universal values have won the day, and I am confident that they continue to win the day.
I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, maybe I just have to ask about the elephant in the room. You know, it's a different section of the Department of Justice, maybe looking at it, but Guantanamo Bay. And if you talk about justice around the world, people just can't see that still being around. And when will that be settled, for example? What are the efforts to do that? Because we know maybe the aspiration of President Barack Obama, and he rise up on the basis of rights and justice. And on top of that, I would like also to look at a lot of the times, because of terrorism, we look at national security only from the point of having weapons or not having weapons. But in the economic sense, the subprime crisis, for example, might just be looked upon as numbers and figures, online transactions, derivative. But even in these parts of the world, it can completely wipe out the progress of nations across years. And you know, people would just lose their head because overnight they are brought back to where their forefathers were, nearer to, or even under the poverty line, because of something that they cannot control. So how do you equate new mechanisms into the definition of security and rights? After this short break, we'll discuss that. You are still watching Agenda Awani, and I'm still here with Tom Perez, the Assistant Attorney General of the United States. I remembered when President Barack Obama was first elected, there was this talk that half of the Harvard Law faculty will be with President Barack Obama, and I even went to the Harvard Law Review to read about that. So it's a given. Justice, civil rights, and law under this present administration is there, and the perception is that. However, people around the world are sometimes confused. If I'm here talking to you about civil rights, but there's this thing called Guantanamo, and more and more there are rising voices across the world, even from the recently liberated Egyptians after the post-Arab Spring, that why do you still have that there? You know, for example, why can't President Barack Obama put his foot down and say, enough is enough? But we understand from the presentation done at this conference in Kuala Lumpur also, that it's not that easy. There are also powers, legislative move by the Senate for Capitol Hill to also not make it easy for the president to just, you know, freely close Guantanamo. So how do you look at that?
Well, the issue of Guantanamo Bay has been the subject of great public discussion. And in the United States, we're here in this conference discussing issues of great import, and like that issue, the issues we're discussing here, in the Guantanamo context, there are many people who have very strongly held views. The president came in and made his position well known to the American people and to the world. There are a number of members of Congress who have a different position. And so over the last 4 years, there has been a very, very active discussion. The number of detainees in Guantanamo has declined significantly. It is still open, as you correctly point out, and this is what the democratic process is about, is having that continuing discussion. And this is one where people have passionate views. And the president has not been shy about expressing his viewpoint. But we must continue to follow and respect that process where people come together in our United States Senate and our United States House and attempt to move forward. And so I expect that that conversation will continue. I expect that there will continue to be less and less detainees there as we move forward.
It's just 100 over from 700 over, 161 I think the number given, if I'm not wrong. But the point made was, there's no U.S. citizen in Guantanamo. You know, it's only for foreign citizens.
Right.
But I guess maybe this is where, you know, your visits overseas is going to be very interesting. Even when we talk about within the parameters of a nation, it's a complex issue of civil rights, protecting the right of a citizen against the state's power, for example. But when we put on the layer of multinational engagement, global engagement at that, and more, for the example of Guantanamo, people are saying around the world, of course it's still around because there's no U.S. citizens. So, you know, the issue domestically is one thing, and the pressures politically, whatever it is. And we've heard at this conference where the political leadership must pay respect and heed the spirit of the Constitution. But then again, if it's involving somebody else's citizen, and at this conference we've heard how the UK government allowed a potential terrorist suspect to cross the border, and now people are putting that against them, that, hey, even by your constitution, if you know that somebody is going to create harmful stuff, you can't just allow these people to go just because it's not your country, for example. So how do you look at international relations in discussing this? Because more and more rights and liberty and security is an international agenda.
Well, we've spent a lot of time in the Civil Rights Division vindicating the rights of people, citizens and non-citizens alike. I've prosecuted cases involving law enforcement officers who did unspeakable things to immigrants, many of whom were undocumented. And we haven't hesitated to prosecute those cases because individuals who are here are entitled to those protections, whether or not they had legal status. So we have never hesitated to make sure that we enforce the Constitution in a variety of contexts. And I didn't win a lot of popularity contests in many of those cases, but my job isn't to win popularity contests. We don't poll test civil rights enforcement. We do what is right. And in the context, again, of Guantanamo, you know, this conversation will continue, and it's an important conversation, and there are very, very strong differences of opinion. I'm hopeful that a roadmap can be found to resolve this matter, and I know the President is committed to finding that roadmap.
So by that alone, you have to come back to Malaysia so we can continue this conversation. But before I let you go, it's only 1 minute. Security now not only defined from, you know, law, gun running or people shooting one another, but economically. Because more and more human rights and civil rights are being tied to even economic agreement, for example. And like the subprime crisis, it's happening maybe at Wall Street, but it's wiping out the whole entire economic security of a nation somewhere else. So how do you look at it?
I mean, security is not simply the absence of war, but it's the presence of justice. And justice involves access to opportunity. And we saw in the United States, in the aftermath of the subprime crisis that you referred to, that millions of Americans had lost their homes. They lost a lot of their wealth. And part of the work that we do in the Civil Rights Division is to hold lenders who were responsible for that accountable, and to help build and rebuild, in some cases, that opportunity society. It's critically important because our economic health depends on it. Every vibrant democracy has a thriving middle class and has ladders of opportunity for everyone. And,
sorry to cut you, but the perception is there's nobody that has been indicted or prosecuted for being responsible for the big mess of subprime crisis. But they are, like you say, lenders now being put to task legally in court for what had happened.
Right. We've done the 3 largest cases in the history of our fair lending program have been done within the last 12 months. Okay. So we have spent a lot of time and will continue to spend a lot of time holding lenders accountable.
Yes. There you go. Maybe the discussion of rights and liberties should go and look at the specifics of things also. Thank you so much, Tuan Perez, for making time.
An honor to be here.
I'll take you up on the offer to visit Department of Justice.
You're always welcome.
If ever I'm given a visa. And thank you so much to you for watching again, Awani. Terima kasih banyak. Dan Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Kita akan jumpa lagi. Dan jangan lupa hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri, email, Facebook ataupun Twitter. Sekian semua malam dan terima kasih.